festival is run entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses, so we encourage you to make a donation to one of the donation boxes that you'll see around sometime this weekend. And there is no flash photography or recording, and it would be great if you could take a moment to turn the ringer off on your cell phone. So, also today, we have Howard Axelrod reading. We do not have Bruce Weber. There were some issues with train cancellations and things like that, so it will be Howard. But so I'm going to introduce Howard, and I first met Howard Axelrod at Grub Street, which is the wonderful independent writing school in Boston where we both teach. I was impressed by his quiet charisma, his approachability, and his dry sense of humor. Plus, he kind of looks like a young Bob Dylan. And Dylan has always been at the top of my creative pantheon of creative heroes. So when I sit next to Howard at an instructor's meeting or an after party and have a beer with him, I feel a secret thrill of vicarious pleasure in the thought that I may well be in the presence of genius. The fact is, I didn't really appreciate how justified this suspicion was until I read Howard's new memoir, The Point of Vanishing. What I'm saying is, if you're a reader, and you probably are, and if you're interested in the best of what contemporary American literature has to offer, you need to pick up this book. The Point of Vanishing is a profoundly immersive narrative. One is struck again and again by the quality of its writing, by the vividness of its characters, by the accomplished lyricism of its language, by the brilliant acuity of its observations, and by the wisdom and humor that permeate its pages. What lingers most of all are Howard's sharply wrought nature descriptions. Setting is definitely a character in this story. The natural world has its own volition, its own cold-hearted poetry, and an essential burden of wisdom to impart. Howard is a master of metaphor, presenting familiar sights and sounds in unforgettable new ways. His writing is propulsive, unabashedly visionary, and strikingly fresh. This book will have you marking pages, returning to sentences just to savor them, and reading passages aloud to anyone who will listen. To me, it feels like a gift in a way that few books do. Reading it, you accompany Howard on a harrowing journey to the stripped-down essence of the human spirit, right to the actual point of vanishing. The cover copy of my version compares it to Into Thin Air, but I would actually put it in the same category as Walden or Black Elk Speaks. Yes, it's that good. If you read it with an open heart, it has the power to change your life. So now we, the lucky people of Brattleboro, have the opportunity to hear some of it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And so it is my great pleasure and distinct honor to introduce my friend, Howard Axelrod.
It's not. It's working. It sounds like I'm hearing the voice inside my head everywhere. Thank you so much for that introduction. I want to thank the festival. I've had a great weekend here. It's like a flower that just... I did brush my teeth this morning. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. I want to thank the festival. It has been a great weekend. I taught a workshop on Friday, which went really well. I was so impressed by the students and by the quality of their writing. Some of them are here today. So, all right, without further ado, I'm going to start by reading the prologue, just to help situate you, to help orient you, and also to kind of disorient you. It does both, I hope. The house wasn't something you stumbled upon by accident. It wasn't something you passed going anywhere else. To get there, you drove through Glover, Vermont, a general store, no traffic light, one busy bee diner, climbed along switchbacks through maples, evergreens, and birches, then turned left onto a wide dirt road. You passed the barn and blue silo of the Moreland Dairy Farm, snaked past a few scattered houses and trailers, then followed deeper into the woods, the maples tapped, tubed, and strung together like prisoners on a chain gang, as it was early March now, sugar season. A few miles in, at a mailbox nobody used, you forked off the wide dirt road onto an unmaintained narrow lane, the deeper snow tugging at your car as though part of a different gravity. You slipped through a tunnel of overhanging trees, came to an empty field bordered by tall pines, then passed an uninhabited house, its siding job left unfinished, then followed as the road dwindled into what seemed only the ghost of a road. No car tracks but your own, the twin trail in the snow behind you, like the vestige of the two ruts in summer, when the weeds between them would grow taller than your hood. A small meadow opened on your left, 3 gnarled apple trees glimmering in the sunlight like chandeliers, and beyond the meadow was the beginning again of forest, with little promise of a house at all. From there, just inside the buried fence posts, you walked, and at the bottom of the steep grade, with its sky blue paint flaking, its lines badly canted, sat the 2-story house, like a sunken ship. Not much from the outside world found me there. In the year and a half since I'd moved in, there had never been a knock on the door. I had no television, no computer, no cell phone. There was a landline, which rang maybe twice a month, so a wrong number was an event. As for other news, the yellowing issues of the Newport Chronicle, stacked in the corner by the wood stove, reported on beaver problems, church suppers, DWI charges, and missing dogs, but all from years past. Sometimes, kindling the fire's embers at dawn, I'd find myself wondering about a handsome spotted pointer or the cutest darn black mutt you ever saw. But then I noticed the newspaper's date. Those dogs had lighted out for their canine dreams 2 summers earlier, long before the snows. The only news that didn't reach me with a kind of ghostliness came through the house's windows or from my daily walks up into the woods. Clouds wrestling on a blustery afternoon, sunlight opening through the birches as though from behind a curtain, slow flurries descending towards dusk. And about once a week, if the roads were clear, I'd make the drive down into the town of Barton for groceries at the C&C, then up the curving road to the Lake Parker General Store. West Glover's tiny post office hid at the back of the store, in an elevator-sized room with bars and a window, as though it had once been the town's tiny bank. The young woman behind the counter was no more than 18, lovely and bovine in her slowness. She would walk the dirt-worn floorboards very deliberately, past the cooler full of milk, past the 6-packs of beer, past the canned goods, then enter the post office and check the box for general delivery. Not wanting to make her any more self-conscious, or myself any more aware of what it would mean to be alone with a woman again, I'd wait up at the counter. When she returned, she'd blush like something blooming in one of those time-lapse nature movies. The red rising up her neck, then her cheek, the blush all the more vivid when there was no mail for me. Maybe this was because I looked something like a wild animal, shaggy beard, eyes too intense. Or maybe it was just because my voice had gone unused since my last trip to the store, and, when I thanked her, too much feeling was stored up inside it. Even to me, my words seemed to come from far away, as though they required travel time, like light from a distant star. So on that moonless March night, when 3 raps came at the mudroom door, surprise wasn't the word for my response. Each rap sounded alarmingly inside the house, hardening the posts and beams into place. A current ran through my body, a rattling physical charge. The blue candle guttered on the table. It seemed I was underwater, and something was bobbing on the surface far above me. In the darkened windows to the woods, the reflection of my dinner flickered soft and shadowy, more the idea of a dinner than anything solid, and my image flickered just the same. On my weekly trip to the C&C, I was prepared, knowing I would be seen. Reflections, however glancing, would be cast back at me from the checkout girl snapping her gum, hippie, from the bulky matrons trundling their carts, drifter. Reflections bearable because they seemed so obviously wrong. But the thought of someone there as close as the mudroom door was like a mirror flashed close to my face. A man alone, a barely furnished room, a candle on the table. The scene like an ancient interrogation, but with no visible interrogator. The downstairs bathroom did have a mirror, but I never confronted it, not brushing my teeth, not washing my face, not stepping out of the shower. Not because I minded my face itself, or even my blind right eye, which had developed a pearly green cataract since my accident, but because the gaunt 25-year-old man in the mirror was no one I recognized. A figure was there, a physical presence, but he followed me only at a distance. Even keeping a journal had come to feel strange, as though I was trying to sketch my own outline, to corral the wind, the snow, and the stars into the shape of a man. Coming to the woods hadn't been an exercise or a retreat. It wasn't something to take notes on and jar for later like summer berries. I needed to live without the need of putting on a face for anyone, including myself. I needed to be no one, really, while carrying the hope that my particular no one might feel familiar, might turn out to be someone I had known all along, the core of who I'd been as a boy, the core of who I might become as a man. Beneath all the masks I'd accumulated over the years, beneath even the masks that resented those masks, there had to be something there, something essential, some sense of reality and of myself that couldn't be broken. The knocking came again, the same 3 sharp raps. Standing frozen by the wood stove, I pictured the night outside, the last stretch of road to the house so narrow, the snow 6 feet deep, the passage like a bobsled run, the darkness mitigated only by the stars. The only people I'd seen in the nearby hills, apart from Nat and his son, who occasionally came to plow the unmaintained lane, were deer hunters. But hunting season was months gone. The winter sun had long since set. Whoever was at the door had to be more frightened than I was. If there was a crazy man in the woods, a wild, bearded loner liable to do anything, I was him. I am the crazy man. I am the crazy man. It was the same thing I told myself so many times hearing a branch snap in the woods or the stairs creak in the middle of the night. I am the crazy man. I am the crazy man. Usually it hardened my fear into something like resolve. But now I couldn't help picturing a middle-aged man in a checked wool jacket slouching at the door, a glowing cigarette in one hand, a rifle in the other, and no deer for miles. The 3 raps came again, more insistent. It was probably an emergency. Someone was probably in need. Smoke was rising from my chimney. Candlelight spilled out onto the snow. There really wasn't much of a choice. I stepped into my moccasins, crossed the plywood mudroom floor, and opened the door. I need a drink after that. Let's see what's, so this next section I'm going to read comes a little bit later. It's in the, I think it's in the 2nd chapter. And so the first 2 sections of the book keep shifting timelines. So there's the timeline in the woods, but then there's also the timeline of the eye accident. That's section 1. It goes back and forth between the woods and this eye accident I had and the aftermath of the eye accident and how it changed how I saw. Second section goes back and forth between the woods still. There's a lot of woods, and a love affair in Italy. And then the third section just stays in the woods for the most part. So this again is from the first section, and it's going to start with the just after the eye accident. So I was a junior at Harvard, and it was 2 weeks before finals, right at the end of junior year. It was a beautiful May afternoon, and I went to play pickup basketball. I played a lot of basketball. I was in high school. I know I'm short, but I was the shortest guy on my team. I could dunk a tennis ball. I could jump. I'm very proud of that. So I played a lot of basketball, and then in college I wasn't good enough to play on the team, but I would just play to relax, to remind myself of all the times I'd played before. It was just where I went. It was where I went to feel like myself, was to go play basketball. And so this will start just after the accident, coming out of the gym, and so what happened is there was a rebound. There was just a loose ball. It was a freak accident. We were charging for the ball, and a boy's finger went into my eye, and it curled behind the eyeball. And the optic nerve is the cable that attaches your eye to your brain, and if it gets detached, or cut, if the nerve gets separated from the back of the eye, then there's no information that can go from your eye to your brain. So that's what happened. So with this section, I'll read right after that, and then I haven't done this yet at a reading where I go straight from from one time frame straight into the other, but it's a big part of the feel of the book is that moving back and forth. So you sort of get the overlay of that trauma on the time in the woods, and the time in the woods as a response in a lot of ways. So I'm gonna try it. I figure this is the most literary audience I'm gonna get wherever I go. So I'm gonna try it. So the way you'll know, and in the book when it shifts between timelines, there's a double paragraph break. So the way you'll know that there's a double paragraph break is you're not looking at the end of the first timeline. It is now. It says now, I said, and then double break. Just you can imagine, and then it'll shift it back to the woods. Everyone ready? I didn't think that was going to take. I could just go like that. I just want you to hear it. I don't want you to. But thank you. We got it. Okay, let's go. Outside the gym, the daylight was shattering. My eye had already swollen shut, and to my left eye, the world appeared a provisional version of itself. The brick sidewalk, Lowell House across the street, none of it firmly in place. The sunlight filtering through the trees as though from no one source. Everything overly bright. The wide stone steps of the gym shimmered like water, each step solid only as it formed under my foot, one step, then the next. Space in general felt wider, less confined, but the space around me felt tighter, as though I was on a lower frequency than everyone else, existing in some range that human ears couldn't hear. Peter followed me towards University Health Services, but I avoided looking at him. It had been his finger that had hooked into my eye. My hand trailed instinctively along the brick wall that lined the narrow sidewalk. The day was too bright. There was nowhere to look. A constant bee sting burned at the back of my eyeball, surrounded by a tight fist throbbing. My t-shirt was stained with streaks of blood, and anger was pushing through my veins. A tight feeling of wanting to strike back, to throw parked cars out of my way. Why had this happened? Why had this happened to me? I told myself it was just music playing in a neighboring room, just something to ignore. But I could feel so much swimming, so many emotions swirling and darting. Some barrier between me and the deepest water suddenly disappeared. Vaguely, I admitted to myself time might be a factor, but didn't admit to myself for what. Below that, as Peter and I crossed Mount Auburn Street, its two lanes suddenly horrible and dazzling, I tried to ignore the angry appeal already buzzing inside me. I can do better. Give me another chance. At University Health Services, a doctor swabbed some of the blood away from my eye and pressed with his thumb around the lid. He was probably in his 60s. He introduced himself as Dr. Hardenberg. He'd seen all this before, it seemed. Maybe my senses were heightened, but his white coat smelled like mothballs. His office was straight out of Norman Rockwell. He said he was going to snip something. It wouldn't hurt. And just over the bridge of my nose, with my left eye, I saw him cut something white, like a bit of boiled egg. It didn't hurt, he was right. Maybe it was just the eye's version of dead skin. But that something could be cut from my eye, and with so little explanation, was not reassuring. After a quick examination of each eye with his penlight, Dr. Hardenberg switched the overhead light back on. "Very good," he said. I didn't move. "You can go back to your dorm room. You'll have quite a shiner." He peeled off his rubber gloves. "I can't see anything in my right eye." "Just heavy swelling, nothing to worry about. In less than a week, the eye should open." I had the strange sensation of desperately wanting to believe something I knew wasn't true. When you put your penlight in my right eye, I didn't see anything. Dr. Hardenberg removed his penlight again. His bare fingers forced my bruised lid open. "You really don't see anything?" "No, I really don't." "Surprising. You'll want to go down to the Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary. You know where it is? You can take the subway, the red line." "Are you kidding me?" Dr. Hardenberg went to the sink, began to wash his hands. "Why would I be kidding? Time isn't a factor? Can you tell me time isn't a factor? No ambulance necessary, if that's what you mean." Physical anger blared through my body. I wanted to grab the doctor by his white coat, and slam them up against the wall. And behind the anchor, there lurked a sickening fear. I hadn't really been doing anything with my life, and now some outside factor was going to make it impossible for me to redeem myself. Of those to whom much has been given, much is expected. Didn't this doctor know who he was talking to? Didn't he know how much I had to do? No ambulance necessary, not necessary because I can't call for one. Simple protocol. I didn't trust this man. Then get me a cab. Dr. Hardenberg stared at me. Now, I said. I liked going outside to sit in the quiet. It was like wading into an ocean, the way it surrounded and held my legs, the way it made me heavier and lighter at the same time. My first few days, I could spend only so much time inside the house without going back to it. It must have been my third or fourth morning. The front door, which was strangely medieval, made of heavy black iron and glass, opened to an unkempt ramble of land that sloped up unevenly towards the trees. A few rotten logs, a kind of token gesture at stairs, were wedged in among the knee-high grass, the daisy fleabane, the black-eyed Susans. The single enormous oak tree had already turned deep copper, a thin skirt of leaves fallen around its base. I climbed up past its bulging roots to the highest point before the birches began. Out above the house's tar paper roof and the spire-like tops of the spruces, the hills dazzled in a sweep of fall color, like a town with all ages on parade. The youthful shimmering yellow, the abiding stately green, the full-throated oranges and reds, all of it fading to harlequin corduroy, then to the mountains going blue in the distance. None of it was new exactly. I'd stopped to appreciate the view every morning. But for some reason, the silence surrounded me now. It was tremendous in its completeness. I'd felt it before when I first pulled in by the meadow, when I came back from stocking up at the C&C. But maybe my senses hadn't quite been able to travel at car speed. And now, given the extra couple days of only walking, my senses were beginning to arrive, to slow down and move in. In the past, whenever I'd been alone, there'd always been the possibility of another person, a kind of door held open in the silence for another person to enter. But now 4 or 5 miles separated me from the moorland farm, 6 or 7 miles from the nearest main road. No one would be coming within miles of the house. Not that afternoon, not that night, not the next day. No human noise, apart from my own breathing, would enter into what I was hearing. It was hard to admit to myself how desperate I was to be here. My only plan, which felt more like a survival instinct, was to return to a place where my senses felt at home. As a boy, I'd gone to overnight camp in New Hampshire, just across the Connecticut River from Vermont. We played sports during the day, sang songs by the campfire at night, hiked in the White Mountains once a week. It was a place I couldn't remember without feeling it in my body. Every walk up to the soccer field carried the scent of sun-warmed blueberries. On the softball diamond, you could smell the rain before you heard it sweeping over the hilltop, a strengthening patter until it was hammering towards you on the leaves. I liked to get up early, before anyone else in my cabin, and sneak out the door to sit on the porch. During the day, I was just like the other boys, saving my best polo shirt for square dance, making bets to win an extra Snickers bar on candy night, equally engaged in debates about the hottest girl in bunk 19 and whether the Garden meant Madison Square Garden where the Knicks played or Boston Garden where the Celtics did. But what I remember most vividly is those mornings. Behind me, through the screen windows, I could hear the soft sounds of my friends sleeping. The lake would be still as glass, just skeins of mist drifting across it, the morning light flashing green and gold. It was my first idea of how a lake should smell in the morning, of how a morning should look and feel, and my first feeling of fitting in with something larger than my friends, of fitting in with the world around me. It was my first glimpse of myself, really, not of myself preening in the mirror or trying to be like my friends, but my first glimpse of myself when the thing I thought of as myself was entirely quiet. Eventually, I'd steal back inside the cabin, not wanting to be caught being different. But as my friends did wake up, I'd try to carry that feeling into breakfast with them, into our activities. Some days it worked, and my perspective seemed as wide as the lake and the mountains, and some days it didn't. But those few minutes on the porch almost always returned me to that feeling in myself, to that quiet of already belonging. returned me to a place to start from with other people. But now the silence, as it began to fill in, wasn't entirely silent. High up in the oak tree, a breeze stirred. Lower, behind me, the same breeze swept through the maples and birches and sounded like a stream. The land began to feel like a room, only a room without ceiling or walls. Bounding into the foreground, a squirrel came ripping through the fallen leaves, every leap crisp and loud, as though the thrashing sounds were the source of his power, propelling him into his next leap. He stopped a few yards from me, whipped his bushy tail in quick, liquid movements. He whipped and whipped. Then he bounded off, one smooth, low sine curve into the trees. As my ears followed, I realized I'd been hearing space as much as sound. The dimensionality of the oak tree's branches, of the forest edge behind me, of the dry leaves on the grass, all of it so much more subtle than I could see. The day was teeming with road signs, with ways to orient myself in space. The acres and acres of wilderness were an invitation, a way to learn what was solid, in the world and in myself. But later in the night, the rain drumming on the roof and the pitch deck above the mattress, the noise of my own mind surrounded me. I started thinking about how the house made no sense. 3 roofs, 2 of them flat, bound to be buried in snow. A front door at the bottom of a steep pitch, bound to be buried too. The triptych window to the woods, beautiful but ideal for losing heat. The house clearly hadn't been designed by a Vermonter, or even by a person capable of envisioning snow. I tried not to think about how my plan, if it even was a plan, was just as haphazardly formed. I tried not to think about Ray and Alexis in med school in New York City, not to think about my parents, not to think about other places I might have been. And then there were the undercurrents, the background thoughts, the ones that had become a part of my mind's weather, the ones I didn't need to think about to feel. If only the basketball had come off the rim differently, if only I'd left the gym after the first game. And, of course, Milena. There was always Milena. Just the cool echo of her name from those dark woods of not thinking carried the scent of my room in Bologna. Oh. The year after graduation, I lived in Italy for a year, so the love story goes back to... Just the cool echo of her name from those dark woods of not thinking carried the scent of my room in Bologna, of the thin blue blanket on the mattress, carried the sound of her voice, so foreign and so familiar in my ear. I couldn't allow myself to think about her, couldn't allow the thought that she had punched my ticket to the woods as much as the accident had. That year in Italy after college had made it so hard to return to Boston, so easy to get in the car and head west, so easy to begin the descent into solitude. It was the two together, delayed chemical reaction, an exponential loss. But pushed from the room, my non-thoughts just slipped into the rain, and they gusted against the walls with tremendous force. The beams creaked, the floor seemed to pitch and yaw. The rain lashed at the window above my head. I imagined the morning sun finding me far out in the Atlantic, quietly bobbing, clutching a floorboard to my chest. I lay awake, trying not to listen, the pillow over my ear. So much for opening my senses, for expanding and slowing down. So much for using my extra sensitivity as a new compass, as a way to get down to something real. I wondered if I'd made a horrible mistake. All right, so I'm going to read just one more section. This section is now deep into the first winter, and as I mentioned in the prologue, there was a landline in the house. There was a phone, but it almost never rang. So when it did ring, it was a very big deal. And in this scene, I've gone to bed. I'm asleep. Oh, and I should say too, my brother is 3 years older than I am in regular human years, but in, I don't know, like lawyer years, he's like 50 to 100 years older than I am. And he always was. The house was an enormous alarm far above me. My heart was pounding, something forcing me back up to the surface, pushing me up, past the bright coral and the strange fish of my dreams. Something was happening up there, something important. Someone had died. Someone had been hit by a car. Someone was in the hospital. I reached out for the phone beside the futon. The ringing stopped. The numbers glowed green in the dark room. Hello? Howie, it's Matt. You okay? Matt was my brother. He lived with his wife in Newton. I was in a house in Vermont. What is it? I said. What happened? Nothing happened. Jesus. Don't tell me you were sleeping. There was a permanent buzz on the line, like the droning of a giant mosquito. Just a second. I put down the phone, lit the candle on the low windowsill above the mattress. It was snowing outside. No moonlight. Sweeps of snow brushed up against the screen. My heart was still going double time, still marching towards disaster. I didn't want Matt to hear it in my voice. What time is it? I got 20 minutes before the West Wing starts. Just thought I'd check in. You do know what the West Wing is. I was trying to do the math. The sun probably set around 4. I'd eaten a bowl of ramen noodles for dinner and then lay down by the fire. As usual, pictures had started to appear in my mind, and I'd fallen into a kind of visualization game. A month or so earlier, it had just started happening. And because it kept me company, I kept doing it. Some nights I'd move through my morning walk to school as a boy, picturing it house by house, the tree roots buckling the sidewalk, past the Zandittons, the Longs, the White House with the black shutters whose family I didn't know, the Sugarmans, the Gorfinkels, the Donowitzes, the Cohens, then the left turn at the bottom of the hill, the stone retaining walls of the houses built on a slope, the yards waist high, the plane trees with their peeling bark, loose sand still on the road after the winter snow had melted. Or I'd picture bunk 7 from summer camp, going bed to bed, Josh Fields, Tom Carradine, Johnny Bent, Kevin Zolot, seeing how much I could recover of their blankets, their favorite t-shirts, their ways of talking, and then surprises would come. The job wheel posted on the door, the Dopp kits arrayed on the bathroom shelves, the sharp smell of bleach, and those surprises would flare into something like short movies. The night of the sock war, the counselor slapping my hand as I reached for an ice cream sandwich, the first real conversation I had with Catherine Cohen outside Titus Hall, music from the square dance floating out over the soccer field. Lying on the wood floor, the firelight shimmering through the grate, I'd find myself laughing out loud, or tears running from my eyes down into my ears. The stories would play on their own, some memories, some daydreams, as though I were watching my very own TV show, and then I'd come upstairs to bed. I'd probably been asleep for a good 2 or 3 hours. The West Wing? Right, Matt said. I saw the words in yellow and realized I was remembering the cover of People magazine from the checkout line at the CNC. It's a TV show about the presidency, I said, my tone like a fortune teller reading a crystal ball. With Martin Sheen, very popular. Matt's relief was audible. His brother's sense of reality was still intact. So what's new? It seemed a strange question. It's snowing, but that's not really new, I guess. Good, it's snowing, and? Well, last night there was a full moon. The snow was blue and very bright. I could read by it. I decided not to mention the shadow of the branches on the snow, the way they looked like roots, as though the moonlight were letting me see underground. I decided not even to mention that normally I read by candlelight. I was doing a very good job sounding normal. Good, and? And what? It felt like a quiz. When I talked to Mom and Dad, which happened about once a month, Mom seemed relieved simply to know I was still breathing on the other end of the line, that I still remembered Star Market and the Stearns and Filene's basement. When I talked to Dad, he asked questions with an implied correct answer. You feeling pretty good? Yes. And you're getting some exercise? Yes. And you're eating okay? Yes. Had he asked about my bowel movements, I would have been happy to oblige. He was leading the witness, which was fine by me. We avoided the topic of my living arrangement by basically avoiding everything. But Matt was trickier. His ill-concealed frustration with my answers betrayed the questions he really wanted to ask. What's wrong with you? Where's the guy I used to watch the Celtics with on the couch? What the fuck are you thinking? But because they were questions he didn't know how to ask and had answers I didn't know how to give, he treated me like a substitute for myself, a stand-in until his real brother returned. So I read this book, thought you might like it, he said. This was a suspicious advance. Really? It's called Into the Wild. Ever hear of it? I've seen Into the Woods. It's a true story. The phone mosquito hummed. My heart was hammering again. What's it about? A guy kind of like you, from the suburbs, athletic, went to Emory, liked to read Tolstoy, but he hated society and went off to live in the Alaska woods. I don't hate society, Matt. No, of course you don't. I could see the look he was giving me across the miles, his mouth twisting, his eyes dark. So how does he get by? He lives in an abandoned school bus. Did he have a wood stove inside? I guess so, I don't know. And then what happens? The mosquito flew closer. The conversation was threatening, one Matt apparently had meant to imply but not begin. I could see him chewing at his lip, working the white scimitar of a scar he'd gotten when he'd crashed Mom's Volvo in high school. It was where his words went when he didn't know how to say them. The kid starves to death. That's what happens. He thinks he knows what plants he can eat, but he doesn't. Sounds inspirational. He poisoned himself. You mean on purpose? Not on purpose, but he was ignorant. He didn't know what he was getting himself into. Did I mention I go to the market in town? That I eat frozen pizzas? He went into the woods in April. He crossed this little stream to get to his school bus, but when he wanted to come back out, it was midsummer. The stream was a river, a raging river with all the snow that had melted. He couldn't ford it. No, he couldn't ford it. The way he'd gone in, it didn't lead back out. I turned to look out the window. I'd been imagining a kid tromping around by an old school bus, dirty, happy, wild, but then he was standing on the bank, the stream gone muddy and violent. My stomach felt horrible. I had the feeling again of swimming up through my dreams too quickly. There aren't any streams here, I said. Great, that's good to hear. Part of me longed for him to say more, to explain more, but our man-to-man talk was clearly over. He'd already gone further than he wanted. Years later, I learned that he'd been the one to push hardest while I was in the emergency room. He'd arrived in rush hour traffic soon after my parents. Towards midnight, while I was in the bathroom throwing up from the pain, the ER doctors had held out one last chance. If a fragment of my optic nerve still held, it could possibly be bolstered by steroids. My vision might be saved. The doctors reminded Matt and my parents of the range of injuries to my eye. They rehearsed the risk of side effects. Please, Matt had said, try anything. The doctors reminded him of the very slim odds of the possible complications, but Matt had kept on pleading. Please, try anything. He's my brother. Try anything. As he switched the conversation now to running into someone from Roxbury Latin, my mind began to see the snowdrifts along the open field, the way they were piled so high. They never melt into a river, but my mind went on picturing them, like there might be some other version of that Alaskan river, some other blockade I couldn't yet imagine. Maybe the road into the house wouldn't lead back out. Maybe it wouldn't be that simple. Then I could hear a door closing and Matt's wife, Jamie, in the background. Listen, our show is about to start, he said. You take care, brother. I hung up and the glow from the phone's numbers went away. The wind kicked up and snow brushed at the window screen. I didn't blow out the candle for some time. Thank you. So I guess now is the Q&A period, so if you have questions.
Yes, and we have two microphones and we'll distribute them.
Why did you write this book?
So I was prompted, I guess there are two parts. One is sort of what prompted me, and then, so the reason the precipitating reason for writing, but then also the real undercurrent reason. The precipitating reason was, I wrote a profile for the New York Times Magazine about James Blake, the tennis player who was recently in the news again with identity theft, which incidentally is the craziest term. If your credit card or bank account number is stolen, that's your identity? It's so American. Like that, oh yeah, that's his identity. Like he lost his bank account, so now he lost his identity. Anyway, that's another book. So I wrote a profile of him in 2005 because I don't know if you know his story. He was a top tennis player. He was top 20 in the world, and then he broke his neck during a practice match. And then after that, his father died of stomach cancer, and then Blake got this virus called herpes zoster, which paralyzed half of his face, and it impacted all of his senses, and he went from being on top of the world, having all of this access, to losing his father, losing his job, losing his sensory orientation in the world. Talk about identity theft, right? I mean, he really lost his identity. And so after that came out, I received an email in my inbox one day that said, "Greetings from Random House." And it was this editor who said, "Do you want to write a book, not about Blake, but we like your whatever." And he wanted me to be like Tracy Kidder, just find some great story and research and a long-form narrative. And I kept thinking, what's a great story? Where could I find a story? I want something compelling and something about orientation and identity, and I just have no idea where to find where is the story. And I think I took a year, maybe 2 years, and eventually I went to New York. I had lunch with him, and finally, somehow it came up that I lived in the woods, and he said, you might want to write about that. And I also realized at that point that whatever story, if I tried to write some other story, I was going to superimpose my story on top. I mean, that my story sort of had been waiting in line. I came back in 2001, so it was then, 2005, 2006, 2007. My story was sort of waiting in line, ready to be told. And doing the Blake thing was really a warm-up. And had I tried not to write it, I think it still would have been seeping out. So it's not that I thought, this will make for a great book, or it's going to be super easy to structure a book about just living in the woods. Where are you going to get tension and arc? And it's not that I thought it would be an easy book to write or that it would necessarily find an audience. I just knew I needed to do it so that I could then write other stuff. But the undercurrent was, and I think this is true of most memoirs, I wanted to understand what had happened. I wanted clarity on why I had gone to the woods, and then how the accident, and then my time in the woods, how all of that fit into my life. Because I think we're all pretty good at compartmentalizing and putting parts of our life that don't fit with the rest of our life in sort of a box for later, or wherever we put those parts. But I think to arrive at a sense of identity that feels whole, that doesn't feel as though part of yourself was stolen, you need to find a way to integrate the whole deal. And I also think, and I just caught the end of the last presentation with Maria Tartar, is that how you say her name? And she was saying something about going into the darker places, and that's where you have to orient from. I mean, that's often the case in fairy tales. And I think in memoir, that's almost always the case too. You have to go into those parts in your life where you were most lost. And once you start to be able to orient from there, from the lostness, that's where you start to find who you are and what's important, and ideally some sort of wisdom.
Wow. I think the detail, you had us in the woods with you. Question about where the detail came from. Whether you journaled when you were there and made reference to that, or as you thought about it, whether the detail came back. I mean, do you vividly see the sine wave squirrel?
Right. Yeah, good thing I paid attention in math class, right? That I know. I spent almost 2 years there, and I saw almost no people. So my company, my conversation, was with those trees, the squirrels that I saw, the birds, chickadees. Chickadees play an important role in the book. And so it's actually quite easy. When I was writing, it was very easy to remember and to picture. I didn't journal very much. As I mentioned in the prologue, I started, but it felt strange because part of journaling is, even if you're never going to show it to anybody, part of it is coming up with a certain sort of voice, a kind of narrative voice, even just for yourself. It's like, I like the way I sound. You're starting to develop a way of understanding yourself, or a way of formulating yourself with your voice on the page. And I didn't even want that. I mean, I didn't look in the mirror at all, and I felt like, especially for to be journaling would be a form of looking in the mirror. So I didn't take notes. But because I was going on the same walk almost every morning, because there was nothing else coming in, I can, in my mind, still walk along that walk in the woods that I took every morning and remember it almost tree by tree. Because it's like, in your town or whatever, in your day, you know who you're going to see at the pharmacy, and you know who you're going to see at the bus stop, and you know who you're going to see at the movie theater, and that was my town, really. So I spent a lot of time just sort of looking at everything, and my senses, to just further it a little, my senses were so open that when I would go into town, even to this small town, when I'd walk into the C&C, which was this market that had maybe, I think, eight aisles, it was overwhelming. Just the packaging is so bright, all these slogans yelling, and I'd see, Jif, and I remember Choosy Moms Choose Jif, and Coke, and I'd hear, have a Coke and a smile, and just walking through the aisle felt like a parade of, and then also there'd be the music playing, how there's always the radio station playing. So in the book I mentioned, it seemed like it was always Elton John and Whitney Houston. Elton John is just always playing in the supermarket. So what it felt like to walk down the aisle hearing Elton John or hearing, Whitney Houston, I want to dance with somebody who, and just being really overwhelmed by that. And by the time I got back to the house and would unpack the groceries, each item, as I took out the milk, I would know where I was, what part of the song was playing as I had picked up. So I could retrieve, this was without trying, it was all just right there. My whole progress through the market and what song had been playing where as I picked up which item. And I think it's just because there was nothing else coming in. And through evolution, we've evolved to be able to have memory for orientation. And then if there are more associations, like there's music also, and there are all these garish products also, it's very easy to remember all that stuff. But most of us now, this is true of me now too, when we go to the market, we're thinking of millions of things. We got to get this, we got to get there, so we're not even hearing that Elton John is playing or that whatever.
I wanted to say thank you first for sharing your words with us. And second, I have more of a process question. So as you wrote your first draft, and then presumably as the narrator and the main character, towards the end of it, you're more informed. And you've just plowed through your story, and you've stayed in your dark place. So during the revision process, how do you maintain a sort of say truthfulness, but like an authenticity to the I, narrator, main character of the beginning prior to being the informed that you were at the end?
Oh, that's interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I don't know did you all understand the question? There are two key parts in memoir. There's that on the page it always just says I, capital I, but sometimes that I is character, it's you in the moment and how things felt, and sometimes that I on the page is narrator, you later looking back. And it's memoirs that work well, that movement between the two I's is seamless. You can't really tell. So how did if I was getting the I character and then things were starting to change, I was getting more perspective, how did I make sure to keep that intact while then having the I narrator, right? Yeah. Okay, so I think a lot of the stuff that I wrote first was the I character. For instance, the very first thing I wrote was the I accident. That was the first thing I wrote, and I changed almost not a comma. It's just, that's what it was, and that's how it stayed. And it's interesting, the way it works is I don't have a lot of I narrator in there. The way my narrator shows through is the structure, the organization, like the cutting back and forth between things. So you can trust, I hope, that there's a governing intelligence behind it, which is really what you need a narrator to do. But the narrator isn't stepping in a lot to say, this is what this means, or now you should pay attention here. And it took a very long time to find that governing intelligence to figure out structure, because I had 500 pages of snow, for a really long time, just snow and snow. and it was so pretty, and I liked writing the sentences, but I just didn't have a sense of structure, because I wasn't thinking about narrative at all when I was there, of course. Even the thing of, how something happens in your day, and as it's happening, or a little bit afterwards, you think, oh, I'll tell so-and-so, won't this be a great story? But there was no prospect of telling anyone anything. So everything that I was experiencing, and it changes the way you experience, it sort of opens things up a little more, was not subject to future narrative. So now that I was trying to write a narrative, I had no narrative sense to the experience. And it took quite, I mean, my agent had to push quite a lot. She said, this was maybe 4 years in, she had me over for lunch, and she said, what? So I'm just curious, where's the climax? What's the climax of the... And the question hadn't even occurred to me. 4 years in, and I've studied writing. I know how it's supposed to, I had no... And then my first answer was like, well, how about when I see the chickadees? Because to me that was really important. And she said, that's a lovely scene, but I don't think that really... And it's helpful she pushed me too, because it sounds like, oh, well, it's just structure and it's a craft thing, and then isn't that somehow going to maybe imperil the truth that's there? But in fact, the reason why I didn't have a climax yet was because I hadn't wanted to go all the way to the darkest place, which is where the climax was. And that narrative structure may feel, as you're struggling to find it, it may feel like, what, this is just a convention, and this is crap, and I'm a poet, goddammit, and I don't need... but in fact, finding a climax generally means going to that hardest part, which I hadn't been willing to go to yet, even after 4 years of snow.
What I hear from what you're saying is a real transcendent experience. And when I hear you say that you didn't use the word I, to me it sounds like you really became present in a way that we spiritual seekers attempt to have happen. And I really get that from the masks and the masks and
Right.
the masks, and that there was no I in the woods.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for noticing that. So I didn't talk that much about the way my vision changed, how the loss of depth perception, this sense of objects no longer looking quite solid, looking permeable, as though I could put my hand through things, and the resulting disorientation of that, and needing to find a different kind of depth perception. And that's where the search, the spiritual searching comes in, because, on the one hand, I'd always had that impulse. That was a part of me that was always there. It's not as though some new thing suddenly emerged. It was always there, but the need for it became greater. But then I was looking for a different kind of depth perspective, because so much we think of depth perception as just being spatial. And then soon after the accident, I realized I was hearing more acutely. Studies have found that your brain adapts. The passageways between neurons changes, and from the auditory part of your brain, it starts connecting to the visual part of your brain, so you can orient visually by what you're hearing. So that was happening, but I still needed more than that, and I think the thing that I went to in trying to go to this beautiful open place was finding a kind of depth perception that also incorporated time. So being someplace where you're aware of time, you're aware of the stars, you're aware of the mountains, you feel geological time or astronomical time. That's another kind of depth. And to be in a place where you're constantly reminded of that, where you're not just surrounded by human just daily buildings and traffic, and it changes your sense of depth. And it's a kind of depth that doesn't require knowing, oh, is this little thing in front of that little thing, or it doesn't require that kind of detail. It requires perspective, relating to something universal rather than something relative. And Thoreau says, why read the Times? And I don't know if he means the New York Times, but he means like read why the clocks, all that. Why read the Times? Read the eternities. And that's what I was trying to do, to be someplace where I was surrounded by the eternities, and thereby give myself a deeper, sort of a different kind of depth perception.
I wanted to know what made you leave
To come back.
your one house. Yeah, what made you come back?
So I don't want to give too much away, but at some point I really did become It felt like I became selfless and some, I became less and less aware of my own body, and there is, Tim mentioned it in his introduction, you do reach a kind of danger zone where I did feel as though I was becoming more and more like the snow and the wind, and then there becomes a recognition that, oh, if I don't go back soon, I'm never going back. I'm going to lose that life that I had, and either I'll die, or at the very least, that part of me will no longer exist anymore. I'll lose my family. I'll lose my friend. I'll lose, and that everybody else seemed to be more like my friends seemed to be aware of that far sooner than I was. But eventually, there's some stuff where I kind of hit rock bottom, and that I realized it too. And there's a thing too, once you get down to that part of yourself where it's sort of like cleaning everything out and then recognizing, so what do I want to put back in to my life? And eventually I recognized the need for other people. And Thoreau also says that his solitude made him more eager for company but less fit for it. And I kind of had that feeling, like once you get down to that deepest level of loneliness or being alone, there's a sense of there being too much beauty to take in by yourself, and wanting to share things with other people. I mean, an impulse towards, okay, I'm aware that I'm alone in some way. I always will be in some way, because like everybody, I have a distinct consciousness, and there's a lot that separates everybody from everybody else. But we're also all subject to that. We all have to deal with that kind of loneliness. And then there are lots of things to help mitigate that loneliness. I mean, various kinds of beauty. And so that impulse to share that, and to be able to come back, knowing that if I didn't, I might not.
So this might be kind of a superficial question, but I just relate to, you were talking about playing basketball and how you felt that there was, at that point, at some level, that was your authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering how that might have changed for you. Like, I understand that playing basketball is not the same when you don't have the same depth perception. Just wondered if you still play at all, and how, if that authenticity is still there, or how it's changed as a result of your experience.
I do still play, not as often as I would like, but whenever I get a ball in my hands, it returns, because I spent so much time doing it. There's, people call it muscle memory, but there's also memory. I mean, it's like, I think there's some metaphor in the book. It's like kind of the body flipping through a scrapbook of my past as I dribble. Because I played when I was a kid, I played in high school, I played a lot in college. When I was in Italy, I played on a very, very semi-pro team. I was a point guard, so I had to call out the plays in Italian, and my accent was really bad, so they always make fun of me. And my nickname, so everybody was much taller than I am, so my nickname was Alta, which means tall. Great sense of irony the Italians have. So it does. It always does bring me back, and I love it, just getting to shoot when I can. But I'll say too that there was always a part of me that seemed to me that an authentic part of myself when I was reading poetry, or when I was reading fiction in my room in college, but that part of myself I didn't know how to accommodate. That part, I came from an anti-intellectual family, and it didn't seem cool, and I was embarrassed really that I liked reading the way I did. It seemed inappropriate somehow. I knew how to be a show pony, how to sort of take the tests and get the ribbons, but I felt very uncomfortable about that. But basketball was safe, it was okay to, but so now it's a lot easier to accommodate both parts of myself. I mean, I spend a lot of time reading and writing, and it feels very much like myself, and I need it in a way I don't need to play basketball every day.
It's part of what I wanted to ask, somebody already asked, but it's funny, when I was listening to you read, I felt this kind of longing and sadness. And I think, you know, I've spent a fair amount of time in the woods, but I wanted just to go there, you know? And like I could never get enough of it. So I was going to ask the question of what made you leave, and there was another part. Do you go back? And oh yeah, do you know the Cold Mountain poems?
I don't.
Hunch on their Chinese poems about a hermit, and there are some beautiful things about people and being in the woods, if you ever get a chance.
Thank you for recommending that. I don't know those poems, but I'll look that up. I don't go back to the house. I've been back maybe 2 times, but people live there now, and someone put in a house in the field on the way there, and there was a trampoline, and there were kids, and it just, the place where I lived it doesn't exist. You know, I can go there in my mind, but it doesn't. And do I still go for hikes? Do I spend time in the woods? Yes, as much as I can. Yesterday, I went for a hike here, just across, whatever that mountain is across the river. I was so happy to be here and to just get up into the trees, and I fell asleep on top of the mountain for a while, which was great. So yeah, whenever I can, and I need it. I really need it, and I'm aware of it when I haven't. And then once I get there, I'm aware of how much it feeds me.
I was curious how you achieved the disassociation part, as in, I'm going to go out to the woods, and then no, really, and don't call, and no, really, I'm staying here, and how to associate is enough trouble, but to disassociate in our society, especially now that it's all about connection, I'm just wondering how hard that was.
For me, it was easy. I mean, that's what I wanted. For my family and friends, particularly for my mother, it was not very easy. But I kind of broke them in, like a rubber band. I just kept, because the 2 years before I went to live in Solitude, I was alternating back and forth between being a teaching fellow at Harvard, which to them was stamp of approval. Everything must be okay. They run into someone at the market. So what's he doing? Oh, well, he's doing great. But meanwhile, I would teach in the fall semester, and then as soon as the semester was over, I would get in my car and just head west with not even knowing where I was going. So the first year I lived in New Mexico for a while. Then the second year I went again. For a week, I went to Nicaragua and this was right after Hurricane Mitch, and I don't speak Spanish. It was just I just thought, oh well, it's cheap, and it was crazy, and I learned that fairly quickly when I wanted to go for a hike, and this guy said to me, you can't go for a hike there without a gun. You need a gun, and you should have someone with you. So I said, well, when can you come with me? And he was like, oh yeah, tomorrow, sure, we'll go. And then of course he didn't show up, and so anyway, so I'm saying I put my parents through a lot. They were scared. I went to say goodbye to my grandmother before I went to Nicaragua, and she said, what, your brains are in your tuchus? What are you? What's the matter? And then when I got back from that, I didn't even tell people that I was back, so a lot of my friends still thought I was there, and I just got in my car and I went west, and I went to Montana first. Went to a friend of a friend's place. There was some guy sitting on the couch who I'd never met before. He said, what are you looking for? I said, I want to find a place where it's quiet, where there are mountains, where there's a store where I can get food, but basically where I can just go for. He said, where you want to go is here. He pointed to a place on the map in Idaho, so then I went there, and I lived there for a couple months. And I didn't have a phone in any of these places. So by the time I went to the woods in Vermont, my parents, I think, were relieved, because it was close. Vermont is maple syrup, it's cheese, it's safe. I was in this country. It was hard for them, but that was better. It was better. And they respected, they stopped calling, because sometimes I just wouldn't pick up, and then they just stopped calling. And sometimes I would sense, this was strange, but when something major would happen, often I'd sense, I'd get pain in my shoulder or something. So my grandmother, I called and at some point my grandmother had a stroke, and my mom was like, how did you know? And I said, I don't know, don't ask, I have no idea, it could have just been a coincidence, who knows, but generally, when major things were happening, I would happen to call in, or so.
I have a question and a statement. I guess this was 10 or 15 years ago that you went into the woods, and now people think one is the same kind of crazy if they don't have an iPhone. Or
I don't have an iPhone.
I don't have an iPhone, or if I only turn on my cell phone when my kids are away from me.
Right.
And they'll say, but what if? And I'll say, well, what did we do 10 years ago, you know?
Right.
So that's a comment. And a question, so I guess after you came back from the woods, you had a certain clarity about things. And I would assume then, in addition to that, with the writing, a different kind or an extension of that clarity. Was there any resistance, or what's the process like making it all shapely for a book? It's sort of a complicated question. I don't quite know how to ask.
It's an excellent question. And yeah, well, I guess we're the same kind of crazy, because with the phone stuff. But so when I came back from the woods, I had a kind of clarity, but it was a clarity that didn't know how it fit with other people, or with I didn't come back like some wise man. I came back. So I'm now 150 pounds, 155 pounds. I came back 120 pounds. I came back, I was overwhelmed by everything. I had to put earplugs in. Like, it was very hard just to walk down the street. So I didn't come back with answers by any means. And it took a while. And then I didn't start writing until whatever it was, 2006, 2007. So it was like 5 or 6 years after. It took a while just to get strong again, to sort of be fit to be in, sort of the daily pressure of daily life. I had to do a lot of swimming, and it took a long time. So then figuring out how what I learned in the woods, or what I'd experienced in the woods, how that might be of use here, how it might be something that I could use in my interactions with people, and the way I listened and the way I saw, and took a little while to figure out. Because when I first came back, the filters on my senses were gone, and I was so ready to hear everything. And in conversation, when someone says, "How are you?" or "What's going on?" it's like a little box comes with that question, and there's a size of the box that comes with every question. And generally, the size of the box is pretty small. And when you lose social cues, you have no sense of the size of the box anymore. And so, it seemed always to happen if I was at some party or talking to someone, I would ask a question, they'd sort of be astounded at the size of the box I was giving, and then that they'd have to go, or they'd get cut off, or if they asked me a basic question, I would try to answer. I also spoke very slowly, because I was used to having all the time in the world, and so it was difficult to get used to that, against sort of what, registering the size of the box and how much you can give, and not asking for someone, just sort of, I was never good at small talk, so, but at least not trying to do enormous talk all the time, I had to work on that. That's all I wanted to talk about, was the big stuff. And that's, most people aren't really interested, or don't have time. If they're interested, but they don't have time.
So we probably, this could go on all day. It's absolutely fascinating, but I think we should probably cut it off. Maybe one more question, because I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to get the book, highly recommended, obviously, and give Howie a chance to sign it. So maybe one more question? Okay.
Hi, I had a question. I was fascinated with your process of remembering when you were in the cabin and you were playing this sort of movie in your head every night, and how, we're talking a lot about how sense deprivation can change the way you perceive, but how does it change the way you remember? And I was wondering if that's something you thought about. It seems like that's my question.
Yes, that's a good question. So, while I was there, I became more visual, and so much of memory is visual and associative. And I found that I had access in a way that I didn't quite have access before. I think in part because there wasn't so much coming in during the day. There was no traffic. There was my mind was really quiet. So because it had that quiet, it was easy for stuff from the back, it's like the back rooms, all those doors opened, and stuff started to come through, and I was surprised by the force of it and how easy it was for things to come. And the ability to not search for stuff in memory, but just to let things emerge on their own, and how association will go to association, as I was saying in that passage. It was almost like a self-hypnosis, I guess, being able to walk and walk and walk along the street as a kid or through the bunk and see really what the clothes that each kid had and the stuff that I never knew I was remembering. And I do think that stuff, we all have that, it's stored there, there's no reason to go back in those files, but there was nothing to do, so that's where I was going. All right, thank you so much, I really enjoyed it.